It has been 9 years now since I was first diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And every year since then, I've been posting a update, just kind of like what's going on with the MS kind of update, putting up here on YouTube. It is part of my kind of unraveling my MS story. If you have not searched YouTube for that term, my MS story, and you're curious about multiple sclerosis, I would do it. There are some just really cool, touching, powerful, weird, different, interesting stories out there of people with MS. And 9 years ago when I was first diagnosed, I posted a story, like my MS story, when I was just completely freaking out because I had just been diagnosed with this disease and it had been a long time coming. Like I had symptoms for 15, 16, 17 years before I finally got diagnosed. I had seen doctors, I'd had brain scans, they'd like cleared me, said it was maybe some kind of blood disease or some kind of muscle spasms or something. But anyway, finally I got diagnosed with MS, and in some ways, it's the weirdest thing, but in some ways it was like the best thing that could have happened to me because I was able to make some changes in my life. So as I've talked about in previous videos, at that point, like this is, almost 10 years ago then, I went on an anti-inflammatory diet, started taking vitamin D, made a job out of like de-stressing my life and just chilling out a little bit. And I have not had an exacerbation since. Zero, zilch, no new symptoms of MS. So for this installment in my MS story, 9 years on since being diagnosed, I'm going to respond to some questions, like the most frequently asked questions I get here on my YouTube channel. I've posted not a lot of videos, like just, periodically I'll post a little something, and I definitely post these updates every year, but I get these kind of questions that show up repeatedly. So I thought I would respond to them here as a way of providing a kind of update as to what's going on. All right, first question that I get pretty frequently, and I think it's usually like when they watch one of my early videos, like my first video about MS where I was just like completely just losing it because I was it was like so new and raw and everything. The thing I get asked a lot is, do you have any new symptoms? And the deal is that I don't. That is just like the best thing about it. Originally, before I was diagnosed and made like some changes in my life, I was having exacerbations. They almost had like a regular frequency. So originally it was like 3 or 4 years between exacerbations. So I would have like numbness in some of my appendages, maybe like my arm or my legs or whatever, tingling, and then it'd be like a couple years and I would have like numbness and tingling again. And then the frequency or the distance of time between those exacerbations got closer and closer, and they started backing up on one another. So I would have optic neuritis, where your eyes get all dark and it's almost like you're blind, but you can still see, but it's just kind of like all dark and everything. I would have optic neuritis, and I would have tingling in one leg, and I would have like crazy nerve pain in my torso, whatever. So those things would just get more and more frequent. When I was diagnosed, and I think it was sort of because I was freaking out. I don't know if that's why, but anyway, I had optic neuritis in one eye, I think it was my left eye, and then that started to get a little bit better like a month later, and then I got it in the right eye. And I had diplopia, double vision at the same time, so it was just the worst. That cleared up like a couple months after I was diagnosed, and I haven't had any exacerbations since. No new symptoms. Now, that doesn't mean I don't have any symptoms. Nerve damage, which is what MS does to you, damages the nerves in your central nervous system. Nerve damage is hard to get over, it doesn't go away super easily. So I've still got some residual stuff, some sensations that don't really come through, a little bit of numbness and stuff. My eyes never totally bounce back, but no new symptoms. I haven't had any new stuff. That's good. No new symptoms. All right, question number 2. What is your anti-inflammatory diet? And the reason I call it an anti-inflammatory diet is because it's described that way in the literature. If you read books about multiple sclerosis and diet, they will describe an anti-inflammatory way of eating. But the thing is those dang books don't all agree. So if you're interested in an anti-inflammatory diet, I would recommend you look at 5 or 6 different sources. Some will say there are inflammatory foods. I'll just say over here, inflammatory foods, and there are like anti-inflammatory foods. So if you avoid the inflammatory foods, that's a good thing, but then you're also supposed to eat the stuff that's like anti-inflammatory. I don't really like worried too much about that. Like, berries and turmeric, and some people say tomatoes, like these lists of anti-inflammatory foods, they don't all agree. So in a nutshell, my anti-inflammatory diet is a whole foods diet. It's not all about eating like packaged foods and stuff. I do avoid the main things that are often listed as potentially inflammatory. Dairy, don't eat any of that stuff, except for eggs, if you count those as dairy. Anyway, avoid dairy, no milk or cheese or any of that stuff, 0. I avoid gluten. There's debate about gluten, like is it or isn't it? Whatever, I can do without it, so I don't eat it. And I don't eat processed sugars, like no refined sugars or any of that. I used to eat maple syrup and honey, but I just kind of quit eating that for some other reasons. But anyway, those are the main things I avoid. I also, it's not listed as like inflammatory foods, but I also just don't eat red meat, pork, beef, any of that kind of stuff. Occasionally, like a couple years ago, I was eating some venison just because I had some. I do eat some fish, like a little bit of fish for the omega oils, and I eat some chicken because I raise chickens. Otherwise, whole food diet, fruits, vegetables, things you buy on the edge of the grocery store, like the vegetable section. I do eat some basic grains, just, rice and that kind of stuff. I don't eat out almost at all. Pretty much cook everything and just focus on like the whole food stuff. It seems to be working for me. In addition, I take a vitamin D supplement. If you've got MS, even if you don't have MS, get your vitamin D checked. It's not that big a deal. Get your vitamin D checked and see if it's low or high. When I was diagnosed with MS, my vitamin D was super low, like way below the normal range. And from what I've read, and it's been a while now since I've done this reading, but when I was doing a lot of reading about MS, it seemed pretty clear that people with low vitamin D levels were prone to their first MS exacerbations or diagnosis or whatever. This question pops up once in a while. Can you tell me your spinal tap story? And sure. I guess I've mentioned that over the years. Like I've mentioned that I had a spinal tap when I was being diagnosed with MS, and it totally sucked. The spinal tap story, it wasn't that big of a deal, but I just had, it sucked at the time. Basically, when I had a spinal tap, I went to this doctor. She was kind of new, Dr. Longbreak, I think her name was. She was in St. Louis at the time. I think she was out at Yale most recently or whatever. She was doing some kind of research study. My understanding was that she wanted spinal fluid for a research study. So back in the day, it was common to diagnose people with MS using a spinal tap because you can treat the spinal fluid and you get this banding, oglio, whatever banding thing going on. And if you get a bunch of bands, it means you've had MS for a long time. Anyway, I don't have a total scientific understanding of that, but spinal fluid was used in MS diagnosis for a long time. Currently, it's more like MRI. Get an MRI, you can see lesions on the brain or on the spinal cord or both. And that's usually indicative of having MS, especially if you've had persistent MS symptoms. But anyway, Dr. Longbreak was like, let's do a spinal tap. And I sort of did that thing that you do sometimes with the doctor. You just sort of consent, like, oh yeah, if you think it's good, let's do it. Next thing you know, I'm in this kind of yoga chair. She's doing the big needle into my spinal cord. And whatever she hit in there, it felt like she hit the entire nervous system. I don't know what she was banging into, but I could feel it and it set me off. And later I found out what I had was this like vasovagal reaction. Basically, I felt like I was going to die. I felt like I was in the process of dying and falling and sweating and just, and I told her it was horrible and she just kept going. She had to get like some extra vials for her study or whatever. It just sucked. It was like one of those 10 minutes of hell kind of experiences. I got over it. It wasn't that bad in the scheme of things. I'm sure you've been through worse, and I know I've been through worse. But anyway, if you are looking to get diagnosed with MS and someone says, let's do a spinal tap, I would say get an MRI first. I mean, that's like the primary diagnostic tool. If you've got lesions on the spine or the brain or both, and you've got MS symptoms, persistent symptoms, they're probably going to diagnose you with MS without the freaking spinal tap. So anyway, that's my story. It wasn't fun. It wasn't the worst. The worst spinal tap stories are the ones where people just can't pop a clot, like they can't clot the hole, and their spinal fluid drains out, and they get the headaches because the brain's all dry and stuff. At least that didn't happen to me. It's starting to rain outside, so I moved to the back of the shop. I think it'll be a little bit quieter back here. All right, next question I've gotten repeatedly over the years, and this is just because, people like to hear the kind of rugged stuff. The question is, what's the worst thing that happened to you with MS? I think the first thing I think about is all the problems with my eyes. It's weird. Like, I had some experiences back when I was having exacerbations with pain, just like really sharp pain. And this is like, it's almost like phantom pain, like you step on a carpet and it's like a bed of nails, and you really like, you react like, ah! Or I had this thing on my torso where I remember at the time, the way I described it was that it felt like someone had taken like a belt sander, sanded off all the skin on my stomach, and then it was kind of drying and scabbing up, and like, it hurt like whenever you moved it or whatever. But if you looked, if you looked at it, like there was nothing wrong. Like it looked totally normal. So those physical pain things were rough, but I feel like the eye issues were the worst because losing my vision, or losing a lot of my vision. I never went totally like blackout blind, but having lost a lot of vision and having double vision, it was as close as I came to sort of being debilitated, to like truly being disabled. I couldn't do stuff. I couldn't drive. I couldn't even really ride my bike that well because I couldn't see behind me. In a fit, because I wanted to leave the house, I would get on my bike and I would go out and I would look at the traffic like behind me, and I would see, one car looks like 4 cars because all the headlights are doubled and stuff. Maybe one car looks like 2 cars. Anyway, that was the worst. And I didn't have a sense it was going to come back or whatever. So I developed a real sympathy at that point, I think, for just people who have had forms of permanent disability. I had a family friend when I was young who was blind, or almost totally blind. And I had like understood that through her, but to experience it was just, it sucked, man. That was really, really rough. And I do think like in the future, even though I've been doing really well, now, like I said, 9 years, no recent exacerbations, like things are going good. I do think if I have a fear down the road of what might happen, I think blindness is one of them. Like mobility, I wouldn't want to lose my mobility, but at the same time, like losing your sight is pretty serious. So yeah, that was pretty rough. Next question. Oh man, I get this all the time. This is hard to answer. The question is, do you think I have MS? And this is the thing, like I get these messages from people and I understand it, man. People get on the internet, they want answers to questions. Their doctors aren't helping them out. They can't see a doctor, whatever. And they tell me things like, I've got numbness and tingling, or I've got pain. Recently I had a question, like I have hip and leg pain. Do you think I have MS? And there's just no way to tell. For me, like sitting here behind the computer screen or whatever, basically the reason for that is that a multiple sclerosis is as I understand it, as it's understood now, is your immune system getting wackadoodle and attacking your central nervous system, attacking your spine and your brain, chewing off the coating on the outside of your nerves to the point that the nerves get damaged. And sometimes it's like a little bit of chewing, and sometimes they just chew on right through. So damage to the central nervous system can manifest in all kinds of things. You can get like a little numbness and tingling. I know I've had a ton of that. I still have some of that like residual. You can also lose control of your entire body, your legs, your eyes, your anything. You can have excruciating pain because your nervous system thinks it hurts, thinks it's on fire. You can think your leg is in a box of ice, and then you can think your leg is on fire, like literally burning. But those sensations, and there's other stuff, there's so much stuff people get with MS. It's like anything related to damage to your central nervous system, loss of control of all kinds of stuff, brain fog, like fatigue, whatever. Pretty much all that stuff can also be caused by something else. And that's, in my most sympathetic moments, that's why it kind of makes sense to me that I was misdiagnosed for so long. I went to doctors with symptoms, and they looked at the symptoms, like, oh, you got double vision. And, they can't just say it's MS, because a lot of things can cause that cranial nerve that like travels through your brain to your eye and innervates the the eye to see to the right, which was what was going on in my case. One eye couldn't go all the way to the right. And now it still can't, but anyway, I got used to it. Something else can cause that too. There's a lot of things that can cause a nerve not to work quite right. So the question of, do you have MS? Find an MS specializing physician just because they're good at recognizing what MS is. And that means you don't just go to the doctor. What you have to do is you have to find a neurologist, and not just any neurologist, because you can find a neurologist that focuses on any part of the brain or the neuroscience or anything. You've got to find an MS specializing neurologist. And those are usually at big research hospitals where there's like an MS clinic. And I know not everyone has access to that kind of thing, but anyway, that's what I recommend if you really want to get an answer, because they will scan you in an MRI, hopefully your brain and your spine, because some people with MS only have lesions on their spine, some only have lesions on their brain, some have like one lesion, it's hard to see. And they will know how to read the scan and put it all together and tell you what you got. The thing is that then they're going to tell you to get on some medication, which I don't personally, I don't do. That's not my thing. I was told to take different drugs by different doctors. That seemed suspicious to me. Like none of them agreed on what drugs to take. I read about these anti-inflammatory diets and the power of vitamin D. I tried that and it seems like it's been working for like almost 10 years. So going down the road of diagnosis means encountering healthcare professionals who are going to encourage you to go on drugs, I guarantee you. Like that's just what they do. But anyway, that's the way you should get your answers, not on the internet. The internet, man, is good for a lot of things. Like there are some great YouTube videos, but I don't think they're gonna diagnose you with multiple sclerosis or something else. It's just not gonna happen. All right, so that is my MS story update for this year, 9 years after being diagnosed. A shout out to all my MS buddies out there on the internet. There's like such a cool network of people putting content on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff. So I appreciate every last one of you. There are also some wonderful groups, especially in Facebook. You know, Facebook's a funky place, but there are some powerful groups on Facebook about the importance of diet and exercise with multiple sclerosis. You know, people just encouraging each other on. Andy McKenna, if you guys haven't seen the dude, he puts out really cool bicycle-related content relating to sort of connected up with having multiple sclerosis. And he put out a movie this last year, and everyone's just like contributing a little bit to this larger understanding. But at age 53, 9 years into being diagnosed with MS, I think I'm doing pretty good. It's not perfect, but I'm pretty happy with where things are at. In 1 year, I will post another update just to keep this thing rolling.